A hush fell over the gathered crowd as the towering figure of Queen Zanara descended from her shimmering spacecraft. Her regal presence was undeniable, 8 feet tall, clad in an iridescent gown that seemed alive, shifting colors with her every movement. But the dramatic effect was somewhat ruined by the booming echo of her translator device, which rendered her voice a few octaves too high. "I demand the forbidden human touch!" Zanara proclaimed, her tone caught somewhere between commanding and chipmunk-like. The diplomats assembled in the hall exchanged confused glances. A balding man in the back cleared his throat, muttering, "Is this some kind of intergalactic harassment suit waiting to happen?" James Carter, a junior diplomat with a knack for sarcasm, leaned toward his colleague and whispered, "Sounds like she needs a therapist, not a treaty." Zanara's glowing emerald eyes swept across the room until they landed on James. His casual slouch and bemused smirk must have stood out among the stiff, panicked expressions of his peers. She pointed a long, clawed finger directly at him. "You," she declared, her voice cracking slightly. "You shall fulfill the ritual and save my people." James blinked, caught off guard. "Me? Oh no, I think you've got the wrong guy. I'm just here for the free coffee." Ignoring his protests, Zanara descended the platform and strode toward him, her translator glitching again to elongate her vowels. "The prophecy foretold a human, with wit and courage, who will provide the forbidden touch. You match the description." "Well, that's flattering," James replied, holding up his hands, "but I'm pretty sure the forbidden touch isn't in my job description. You might want to check HR. The room erupted in nervous laughter, though it quickly died under Zanara's intense glare. She loomed over James, her height making him feel like a kid caught sneaking a cookie. "Your sarcasm is irrelevant. Come with me, Earthman." Before James could protest further, 2 alien guards, hulking creatures with squid-like features, flanked him, gently but firmly guiding him toward the ship. "Wait, wait, wait!" James called out, craning his neck to address the rest of the room. "Doesn't anyone want to know what this forbidden touch thing is before you just let me go?" The Secretary General, clearly relieved not to be the chosen one, simply shrugged. "Good luck, Mr. Carter. Godspeed." James groaned as he was escorted up the ramp. "Great. I'm off to save the galaxy with a queen who thinks sarcasm is a mating call." Once aboard, James marveled at the alien technology. The walls pulsed softly, as if the ship were alive, and every surface seemed to glow faintly. It was awe-inspiring, until the Queen started talking again. "The forbidden touch is an ancient ritual," she explained, pacing dramatically. "A sacred connection that will unleash the energy needed to restore my planet's core." "Uh-huh," James said, nodding. "And you're sure it's me you need? Not, I don't know, a trained professional? Maybe someone with a PhD in touching things?" Zanara stopped pacing and fixed him with a glare. "You doubt the prophecy?" "Oh no," James replied, smirking. "I just doubt I'm qualified. Unless the ritual involves awkwardly spilling coffee on myself and forgetting people's names." Zanara tilted her head, clearly misunderstanding his humor. "If coffee is a necessary component, we can provide it." James sighed, pinching the bridge of his nose. "Never mind." As they moved deeper into the ship, James was led to a chamber that looked like a cross between a high-tech spa and a nightmarish alien art exhibit. Strange sculptures lined the walls, organic shapes that seemed to pulsate in time with an unseen rhythm. In the center of the room was a glowing platform. "This," Zanara announced with a flourish, "is where the ritual will take place." James stared at the platform, then back at her. "Okay, but I think we need to clear something up first. What exactly does this forbidden touch involve? Because if it's anything, inappropriate, I'm gonna need a lawyer." Zanara furrowed her brow, clearly offended. "The ritual is entirely sacred. It requires emotional synchronization. A bond that transcends mere physicality." James raised an eyebrow. "Right. So, a hug?" "A what?" "A hug," James repeated, miming the motion. Arms around each other, a little pat on the back, maybe an awkward there if someone cries. It's pretty standard." Zenara stared at him as if he'd just spoken in tongues. This hug is not mentioned in our records. Well, that's a relief, James muttered. For a second there, I thought I was about to become the galaxy's most inappropriate diplomat. Zenara didn't laugh. She rarely understood Earth humor, but she seemed intrigued by his explanation. Perhaps this hug is a precursor to the ritual. James sighed. Lady, I think we're gonna need to work on our communication skills. The translator hiccuped, turning her response into a garbled mix of alien clicks and English. Prepare your soul, BZZT, for the touch. James rolled his eyes, muttering under his breath. Yeah, this is going great. James sat awkwardly on what he could only describe as an alien recliner. It hummed gently beneath him, probably massaging him, though it felt more like a vibrating washing machine. Across from him, Zenara paced the room with the intensity of a general planning a war, though her attempts to exude charm were painfully obvious. Human, I have studied your species thoroughly, she declared, holding up a crystalline device that projected bizarre images in the air. James squinted at the display. Was that a clip from a dating show? Oh no, he said, a grin creeping onto his face. Please tell me you didn't base your understanding of human romance on The Bachelor. Zenara stopped mid-step. Is this incorrect? The data suggested it was a comprehensive study of human mating rituals. James bit his lip to keep from laughing outright. I mean, technically, it's not wrong. But if you think handing out roses is the key to this emotional synchronization thing, you're in for a rude awakening. The Queen frowned, clearly displeased. Very well, Earthman. What, then, is the correct approach? He leaned back in the chair, folding his arms. Well, for starters, maybe don't refer to people as Earthman. It's a little impersonal. I see, she said, nodding gravely. A more personalized approach is required. She stepped closer, her expression intense. James Carter, junior diplomat, wielder of sarcasm and skepticism, shall we begin the synchronization? Wow, James replied, smirking. That was almost romantic. Almost. Zenara straightened, clearly taking his sarcasm as a compliment. She sat down across from him, her posture unnervingly formal. In your Earth customs, is this where we engage in small talk? You're catching on, he said, grinning. All right, I'll go first. So, what's your favorite color? And please don't say something weird like the screaming void of the cosmos. The void does have its merits, Zenara replied earnestly. But I find myself drawn to lavender. James blinked. Huh. Didn't see that coming. It is the color of unity on my planet, she explained. A symbol of balance and renewal. Well, that's unexpectedly wholesome, James said. Here I was expecting you to say something about crushing your enemies. Zenara tilted her head. That comes later. James couldn't help but laugh. You've got a solid sense of timing. I'll give you that. Encouraged by his reaction, Zenara leaned forward, lowering her voice. Tell me, James, what would you consider an ideal bonding activity? He rubbed the back of his neck, feeling the weight of her stare. Well, that depends. Are we talking about Earth bonding or whatever alien ritual you've got planned? Both, she replied, her tone as serious as ever. Okay, well, James said, thinking aloud. Earth bonding usually involves something low-key. You know, grabbing a coffee, watching a movie, maybe sharing an embarrassing story or two. Embarrassing? Zenara repeated, her brow furrowing. How does humiliation facilitate bonding? It's not about humiliation, James explained. It's about being vulnerable. Showing that you're human, or, alien in your case. Zenara considered this, then straightened her back with an air of determination. Very well. I shall share a tale of my own vulnerabilities. Oh, this ought to be good, James said, leaning forward. She hesitated for a moment before speaking. When I was a youngling, I once challenged my elder sibling to a duel. I believed myself superior in every way. However, I underestimated the slipperiness of the ceremonial oil and fell. James stared at her, waiting for more. That's it. You fell? It was witnessed by all in the great hall, she added, her voice heavy with faux solemnity. For weeks, I was referred to as Zinara the Slippery. James burst out laughing. Oh man, that's gold. If I had siblings, they'd never let me live that down. Zinara seemed perplexed by his laughter but not offended. You find this amusing? Absolutely, he said, wiping a tear from his eye. I mean, sure, it's embarrassing, but it's also kinda endearing. Endearing, she repeated, as if tasting the word. This is a favorable reaction? Very, James replied, his grin widening. You're learning, Your Majesty. Buoyed by his approval, Zinara turned the tables. And what of you, James? What is your tale of vulnerability? Oh, you don't want to hear that, he said, waving her off. I insist, she replied, her tone leaving no room for argument. James sighed, leaning back in his chair. Fine. Back in high school, I had a major crush on this girl. Decided to impress her by joining the talent show. My talent? Beatboxing. Zinara looked intrigued. What is beatboxing? It's like making music with your mouth, James explained. Except I wasn't any good at it. Got booed off the stage in under a minute. Zinara's lips twitched, and James could have sworn she was suppressing a smile. That is quite the tale. Yeah, well, James said, shrugging. It builds character. Indeed, she replied. Perhaps this is the essence of your earth bonding, facing ridicule and emerging stronger. Something like that, James said, smirking. So, are we bonded yet, or do I need to embarrass myself some more? Zinara rose from her chair, her expression inscrutable. This is merely the beginning, James Carter. Prepare yourself. For what? He asked, suddenly wary. To master the forbidden touch, of course, she said, her tone completely serious. James groaned. Why do I feel like I just signed up for an intergalactic self-help seminar? James couldn't decide whether the ship's soft, pulsating walls were calming or unnerving. He sat at a round table where alien artifacts were displayed like conversation starters, and Zinara sat across from him, her regal posture rigid. Her confidence in commanding armies seemed to crumble in the face of small talk, and the air between them was thick with awkward silence. So, do you do this often? James asked, smirking. Pick up random humans to save your planet? This is my first attempt, Zinara replied earnestly. And you are hardly random. The prophecy foretold someone with wit, courage, and moderate aesthetic appeal. James choked on his laugh. Moderate? Gee, thanks for the confidence boost, Your Majesty. She frowned, tilting her head. I assumed honesty was a virtue among your kind. It is, James said, holding back another chuckle. But you might want to dial it back a bit. Humans tend to prefer compliments, even if they're not entirely accurate. I see, she said, nodding as if taking mental notes. Then, your jawline is marginally superior to the average. James grinned, shaking his head. Wow, you're really nailing this. Encouraged, Zinara leaned forward. James, I must understand your species' emotional synchronization methods if we are to succeed. What, precisely, triggers your species to form bonds? Well, James said, resting his chin on his hand, usually it starts with finding something in common. Hobbies, interests, that sort of thing. Hobbies, Zinara repeated thoughtfully. My hobbies include starship maintenance, military strategy, and consuming nutrient orbs. Yeah, that's not quite what I meant, James replied. For humans, it's more like, I don't know, cooking together, binge-watching TV shows, or, if you're feeling adventurous, trying escape rooms. Zinara's expression was blank. I understood the first activity. The others are alien to me. James laughed. Well, you're in luck. I'm pretty great at teaching aliens. Then teach me, she said, her tone suddenly serious. We must achieve synchronization quickly. James hesitated, caught off guard by her intensity. All right, let's start with something simple. Ever heard of a high five? She raised an eyebrow, or at least what he assumed was an eyebrow. Explain. James held up his hand. It's like a celebratory gesture. You slap someone else's hand. It's fun, trust me. Zenara studied his outstretched hand with suspicion. This slapping ritual strengthens bonds? Not scientifically proven, James admitted, but it's a start. Here, just follow my lead. She slowly raised her hand, mimicking his position. When their hands connected, she flinched slightly, her translator spitting out a garbled phrase that sounded suspiciously like a swear word. That's it, James said, grinning. Congratulations, you just nailed your first high five. Zenara inspected her hand as if it might have changed from the experience. I do not feel synchronized. Yeah, it's a process, James said. Baby steps. I am unfamiliar with the steps of infants, Zenara replied, her tone deadpan. But I trust your guidance. James stifled a laugh. Okay, maybe we skip the metaphors for now. Zenara nodded, then clasped her hands together as if preparing for a battle briefing. Tell me, James Carter, what is the next step? He scratched the back of his neck, searching for something simple. All right, let's try sharing a meal. That's pretty universal, right? She tilted her head. Our nutrient orbs are highly efficient. Consuming them would provide the necessary energy for bonding. James winced. Yeah, no offense, but that doesn't sound very appetizing. Do you have anything resembling Earth food? Zenara gestured toward a panel, and a small alien device emerged, humming softly. A translucent bowl filled with glowing blue cubes materialized in front of him. He picked one up, inspecting it cautiously. So, what's this? Space jello? It is an energy concentrate, Zenara explained. It adapts to the eater's biological needs. James popped one in his mouth, chewing experimentally. Huh. Not bad. Tastes like, I don't know, Gatorade and regret. Regret? She asked, confused. It's a human thing, James replied. Anyway, sharing food is great for bonding. And hey, we're off to a solid start. You didn't poison me. That was never my intention, she said, frowning slightly. Although, if you failed the ritual, death is a probable outcome. James froze mid-chew. That's not very comforting. She tilted her head. Was that not humorous? Dark humor, James said, shaking his head. You're full of surprises. Zenara straightened her posture, clearly pleased with the comment. I shall continue to surprise you, James Carter, if it aids our synchronization. Well, at least one of us is optimistic, he muttered. The hum of the ship seemed to grow louder, and Zenara's expression turned serious. The ritual chamber is ready. We must proceed. James raised an eyebrow. Already? I thought we'd at least have dinner first. This is not a courting ritual, she replied, her tone clipped. Could have fooled me, James said, smirking. All right, lead the way, Your Majesty. Let's go save your planet. As he followed her through the glowing corridors, he couldn't help but feel a mix of curiosity and dread. Whatever this forbidden touch ritual entailed, he had a sinking suspicion it was going to be as awkward as their bonding session, if not worse. The chamber was vast, glowing with hues that shifted from deep blue to radiant gold. In the center stood a raised platform, surrounded by floating symbols that pulsed in rhythm with some unseen energy. James stared at the setup, his curiosity battling with apprehension. So, let me guess, James began, his tone dry. I just stand on that thing and then, what? Magic happens? Zenara stepped forward, her regal demeanor returning in full force. The ritual requires precise emotional resonance. You must focus your thoughts on connection, trust, and other bonding emotions. Trust and bonding, James repeated. Right. Not exactly my forte. She turned to face him, her expression unreadable. You will succeed. You have no choice. Ah, the inspirational pep talk, James quipped. Nothing motivates like existential pressure. Zenara ignored his sarcasm, gesturing for him to step onto the platform. As he did, a low hum filled the air, and the floating symbols began to swirl around him. He squinted, trying to make sense of the patterns, but it was all gibberish. "What am I supposed to do here?" he asked, glancing at Zanara. "Do I recite an alien mantra? Dance? What's the protocol?" "You must extend your energy toward me," she explained, her tone unusually hesitant. "The bond must be initiated by mutual intent." James raised an eyebrow. "Extend my energy? That's a bit vague. Do you mean like a handshake? A fist bump? I'm gonna need specifics, Your Majesty." Zanara hesitated, her usual confidence wavering. "It is difficult to explain." "Fantastic," James muttered. "We're winging it." "My favorite." She stepped onto the platform with him, the symbols now orbiting them both. The hum grew louder, almost like a heartbeat. Zanara extended her hands, her expression uncharacteristically vulnerable. "Take my hand," she said, her voice softer than usual. James complied, though he couldn't resist a smirk. "If this turns into some kind of cosmic trust fall, I'm out." As their hands connected, a jolt of energy shot through him, making him gasp. The symbols around them flared brightly, and for a moment, James felt an overwhelming flood of emotions, not his own, but Zanara's. Pride, fear, hope, and an undercurrent of loneliness so profound it made his chest ache. "Whoa," he said, his voice shaky. "What was that?" "Our energies are beginning to align," Zanara explained, her own voice tinged with emotion. "But it is not enough. You must let your barriers down." James blinked at her. "Barriers? Lady, I don't even know what my barriers are." "Your sarcasm," she replied, her gaze piercing. "Your deflections. They shield you from vulnerability." He opened his mouth to retort but stopped himself. She wasn't wrong, and the sincerity in her voice caught him off guard. Taking a deep breath, he decided to give it a shot. "All right," he said quietly. "No deflections. No jokes. Let's do this." He focused on the connection, trying to let himself feel whatever it was he was supposed to feel. Memories surfaced, moments of happiness, pain, and everything in between. He thought of his childhood, his awkward teenage years, the dreams he'd let go of. For the first time in a long time, he let himself be vulnerable. The energy between them intensified, and the room seemed to pulse with light. Zanara's expression softened, and for a brief moment, James thought he saw a flicker of gratitude in her eyes. "It's working," she said, her voice barely above a whisper. "We are synchronizing." "Great," James replied, managing a weak smile. "Now what?" Zanara hesitated, as if reluctant to say the next part. "Now, the final step." "Final step?" James repeated. "You're really dragging this out, you know." She took a deep breath, her usual regal composure slipping just enough to reveal her nerves. "The final step is the forbidden touch." James stared at her, his mind racing. "Okay, I'm gonna need some clarification here. What exactly are we talking about? A hug? A kiss? Something more?" Her cheeks flushed a faint purple, a clear sign of embarrassment. "It is not physical. It is a connection of souls." "A connection of souls?" James echoed, nodding slowly. "Right. Totally not vague at all. You must focus on trust and unity," she continued, ignoring his sarcasm. "On the bond we have formed." James sighed, running a hand through his hair. "All right, fine. Connection, trust, unity. Got it." He closed his eyes, trying to focus on the feelings they'd shared so far. The loneliness he'd sensed in her, the vulnerability she'd shown, the strange but undeniable bond they'd formed. It wasn't exactly easy. James wasn't used to this level of introspection, but he gave it his best shot. The energy around them surged, and the symbols spiraling through the air seemed to merge into a single, blinding light. James felt a strange warmth spreading through him, a sense of peace he hadn't experienced in years. When he opened his eyes, Zanara was staring at him, her expression a mix of awe and relief. "It is done." "Done?" James asked, blinking. That's it. No fireworks? No confetti? The ritual is complete, she said, stepping back. You have saved my people. James let out a long breath, his shoulders sagging with relief. Well, that's good to know. For a second there, I thought I was about to ascend to some higher plane or something. Zenara allowed herself a small smile. You underestimate your significance, James Carter. He grinned, his usual sarcasm returning. Yeah, well, you're the first person, or alien, to ever say that. Her smile widened, and for a moment, the tension between them melted away. James couldn't help but laugh softly, shaking his head. All right, he said, stepping off the platform. So, what now? Do I get a medal? A parade? Maybe a world's best synchronizer mug? Zenara tilted her head, clearly not understanding the joke. You will return to Earth, of course. James nodded, a hint of disappointment creeping into his voice. Right. Of course. James stepped back from the glowing platform, still feeling a faint tingle in his fingertips. The air in the chamber had shifted. The pulsing energy was calmer now, the symbols fading into a soft, golden glow. Zenara stood motionless, her gaze fixed on him with an expression he couldn't quite decipher. So, James began, breaking the silence. Was that as weird for you as it was for me? She blinked, her regal composure returning in an instant. The ritual was a success. My planet's core is stabilizing. Great, James said, shoving his hands in his pockets. Guess my work here is done. Zenara hesitated, an unusual softness in her voice. You have done more than fulfill a prophecy, James Carter. You have surprised me. Surprised you? He asked, raising an eyebrow. What, because I didn't screw it up? Because you did not treat this as a duty, she replied. You treated it as a connection. James chuckled, shaking his head. Don't give me too much credit, Your Majesty. Half the time, I didn't know what I was doing. Perhaps, she said, her lips curving into a faint smile. But that did not diminish its value. The warmth in her tone caught James off guard, and for a moment, he wasn't sure how to respond. He glanced at the symbols still faintly glowing on the walls, then back at her. So, he said, clearing his throat, what happens now? Do I get a galactic key to the city or something? Zenara tilted her head, clearly confused. What purpose would a key serve in interstellar travel? Never mind, James said, grinning. It's an Earth thing. She nodded, as if filing the information away for later. Your role in this is complete, James Carter. You may return to your people. Right, he said, his voice quieter than usual. Back to Earth. Zenara stepped closer, her towering figure making him feel small again, though her presence was less intimidating now. Will you miss it? Miss what? He asked, looking up at her. This, she said, gesturing to the chamber around them. The connection. The experience. James hesitated, the weight of her words settling over him. Yeah, maybe a little. It's not every day you save an alien planet with a touch. She studied him for a moment, then said, almost hesitantly, You could stay. The words hung in the air, surprising them both. James blinked, caught off guard. Stay? On your ship? Your planet? I don't even know if your food agrees with me. Your presence would not be unwelcome, she said, her voice steady but softer than he'd ever heard it. James laughed, though it came out more nervous than amused. That's quite an offer. But I'm not exactly the intergalactic type. I don't even like flying coach. Her brow furrowed, clearly not understanding the joke, but she didn't press him. Instead, she stepped back, her usual regal demeanor returning. As you wish. Your choice is yours alone. James felt a strange pang in his chest at her words, but he pushed it aside. Thanks for the Save the Galaxy gig, Your Majesty. It's been interesting. He turned to leave, but her voice stopped him. James! He glanced back, and for the first time, she looked almost human. Vulnerable, even. Yeah? She hesitated, then said, You have my gratitude. And my respect. James smirked. Well, that's a first. Most people just tolerate me. Zanara didn't laugh, but her expression softened. Farewell, James Carter. Take care, Zanara, he said, giving her a small salute before stepping out of the chamber. The walk back to the docking bay felt strangely heavy. The hum of the ship, once intriguing, now felt distant, almost melancholic. As James reached the ramp, he turned back for one last look at the glowing corridors, the strange alien technology that had become oddly familiar in such a short time. The ramp began to lower, revealing the Earth delegation waiting below. He could see the relief on their faces as he appeared, unscathed and alive. But as he stepped off the ship, he couldn't shake the feeling that he was leaving something important behind. The crowd of diplomats erupted into applause, but James barely heard it. His thoughts were still on the towering queen with her awkward attempts at humor, her unshakable determination, and the vulnerability she'd only shown him. Welcome back, Mr. Carter, one of the officials said, clapping him on the back. You've done humanity proud. Yeah, James muttered, forcing a smile. Just another day at the office. He glanced over his shoulder one last time, but the ship was already ascending, its shimmering hull disappearing into the sky. He sighed, shoving his hands in his pockets. Goodbye, Zanara, he murmured under his breath. As the crowd ushered him toward a waiting car, James couldn't help but wonder if he'd made the right choice. He'd saved her planet, fulfilled the prophecy, and done his duty. But somehow, it didn't feel like enough. The car door closed, and the Earth delegation cheered again, but James barely noticed. His thoughts were already drifting back to the alien queen and the connection they'd shared, a connection that, despite everything, felt far from forbidden.